Well, it's the day after Halloween, and while this isn't really a horror movie, it does have some horror elements, so I figure the timing is right. Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Now, Terminator 2 Judgment Day is the second Terminator movie. It was directed by James Cameron, and this movie really is a movie that shouldn't exist if you're a purist when it comes to the original Terminator, because in that movie, Kyle Reese clearly says that nobody else comes through, nobody goes home, it's just the T-800 from that movie and Kyle Reese. It's them, they have to fight it out in the past, and that's it. But now we find out that Skynet and the Resistance could actually send more people or Terminators through. They had a fail-safe because while they were sending the first Terminator to kill Sarah Connor, they were sending a second Terminator to kill a young John Connor, played by Eddie Furlong in this movie. And after Kyle Reese went through the time machine, John Connor discovered this and sent a reprogrammed T-800 back in time to protect him as a young boy. And if that setup sounds needlessly complicated, it's because it is. They really had to find a workaround because that first Terminator movie was not setting up any sequels. It was just going to be a standalone movie, and the success of that movie made it necessary for James Cameron to revisit this material and find a way to make another one, because again, that was a very successful movie on a very low budget. And here they have a bit bigger budget. It's still not a massive budget by today's standards, but they were able to do a lot more things, play around with a lot new technology, and it really does show in this movie. This is a very clean movie, especially compared to the original, where some of the special effects could be a little wonky from time to time. Here, all the effects are phenomenal, most of which are practical. Now I'm going to talk about some of the digital special effects that they were doing here that was very experimental, but for the most part, a lot of this is practical. Everything with Arnold Schwarzenegger, as the movie goes along and he gets more and more destroyed and broken down, that's all practical. It looks great. You can definitely see how they've learned from some of the techniques used on the original to improve for this movie. It just looks so good when his face starts ripping and you see the metal underneath. It looks so realistic. It's great. And with the new Terminator in this story, the T-1000, he's a man made of liquid metal. He's much more of that infiltration unit that Arnold was supposed to be in the original. But after you cast Arnold Schwarzenegger, this big, massive dude, he's not really a stealthy guy. He doesn't exactly blend in. He just kind of walks into a bar, attracts probably a little bit too much attention to himself. But Robert Patrick as the T-1000 is the complete opposite. He's very sleek, he's very agile, he blends in phenomenally well. He can actually manipulate his liquid metal body to look like anybody, which is way more scary, especially to a small kid, than the hulking Terminator of the original. And because of this liquid metal body, when it takes damage and it gets shot or grenaded and you see it kind of blow up because it's all liquid metal, it's all this kind of goopy substance, it reforms almost instantly. And that's where these digital effects really come into play, because every time you see it get shot or blown up or its head split open or any kind of weird visual with holes in him, that is all done practically when you see it just on camera. But then when it heals up, when it morphs back together, that's where the digital effects come into play. And it's used only in about a handful of shots. Really, there's not a lot of digital effects in this movie if you actually count the shots, but the way they use these effect shots are so memorable. For instance, there's a scene where the T-1000 has to kind of melt down to the floor and spread out so he's not seen, and then he reforms from the tiles. That's completely digital. When he walks through the bars, that's another digital shot. When he kind of turns into this goopy snake-like substance and reforms in the cockpit of a helicopter, that's another example. And again, all these aren't very long shots, and there's not many of them, but James Cameron and company knew how to use these shots in a way that tells the story visually very quickly, so that they actually gave the animators time to work on these shots, to get the reflections right, to get it to match the background, because this is some of the most convincing CGI that you'll see in a movie, even by today's standards. It looks phenomenal. And that's because back in 1991, they didn't take it for granted that CGI could do anything. They were literally building the programming for it while they were making this movie. This was brand new stuff. But effects aside, what really happens in this movie? Well, like I said before, you have two Terminators this time, one sent to kill John Connor and another one sent to protect him. And John Connor is this punk kid who likes to ride motorcycles, was kind of moved from place to place after his mom got locked up because she kind of spilled the beans to too many people about the impending nuclear holocaust of the Terminator future. And so people think she's crazy, and she's been institutionalized for God knows how many years, but those years have definitely been kind to her because she's been working out, she's been getting fit. Linda Hamilton in this movie is not the same Sarah Connor that you saw in the original Terminator. She's not this kind of shy, meek waitress that we saw in that first movie. No, this is someone who's clearly been conditioning her body for the apocalypse. She's been doing pull-ups, push-ups, she's been exercising, she's got biceps for days. She's been working with gun runners over the border to try to familiarize herself with different weaponry and firearms, and just prepping like there's no tomorrow. She's got supplies stowed away with guns and ammunition and food, but none of that really does her any good because, like I said, she's been locked up in this mental institution, and John has kind of been on his own without any kind of real parental leadership. And he knows about the future from his mom, but he doesn't necessarily believe it. He doesn't really want to believe it until the Terminators come knocking at his door. And the T-1000 kills his foster parents in pretty grisly fashion. Luckily, Arnold Schwarzenegger gets to him before he can finish the job with John. And now we have the same kind of road trip survival movie that we got in the first movie, but now with the young John Connor. And the first thing he wants to do is like, okay, all this is true. Everything my mom's been telling me is true. We have to get her out. So the first order of business is break her out of the asylum. And they do that, but it's Arnold Schwarzenegger who's breaking her out, and she's not too trusting of him. So there's actually a really interesting character arc in here. Not just the predictable one that you'd probably get by watching this movie, is John realizing that he has this responsibility to be a leader in the future, that he's kind of coming of age in this movie. But really, Sarah Connor has an arc because she's starting to see a bit more of the human side of these Terminators, that these Terminators are not just mindless killing machines, that they can be programmed, they can be taught, they can be trained to love and care and protect, because she sees that with the T-800 and John Connor. There's a very interesting kind of surrogate father figure role that the T-800 plays in this movie, and it's not overplayed, it's pretty subtle, it's sprinkled in there, and it's just the right amount where if it was overplayed anymore, it would have felt forced. But because it's the Connor family and all the trauma that they've already experienced, it does feel very grounded because it's all coming from a real place of human family. Really, the Terminator movies, at least the first two, if you want to look at it this way, are a story about family and giving the best possible future for your kid. That's what Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor wanted for their son in the first movie. That's what Sarah and the Terminator are trying to provide for John in this movie. It's what John is fully realizing as he's getting older. That's actually a really touching backbone to give a story that on the surface is just mindless action and endless violence. And yeah, to a degree it is that, because there's a lot of great action set pieces in this movie. The stunts are phenomenal and the violence is classic Terminator violence that you'd expect, but it's this story about the Connors and the family unit that really gets my attention in this movie and is what elevates this movie, I'd say, above the original as far as story and above all the other Terminators as far as just general quality in filmmaking, because all the other Terminators really leaned into the more sci-fi aspects, but here there's a very human story at the heart, and I appreciate that. But after John and Sarah reunited, there's a pretty interesting subplot with Cyberdyne Industries that they actually try to shut down Cyberdyne and their AI programming department, because what Cyberdyne did is they took the CPU chip from the original Terminator and the hand that was left of the original Terminator after it got squashed, and are now trying to reverse engineer Skynet, and that's not a good thing, and Miles Dyson is on the forefront of this. So Sarah takes it upon herself to terminate Miles Dyson before he can create Skynet, which introduces another interesting idea, is that not all Terminators are robots. Because in this setup where Sarah is about to kill Miles Dyson, what exactly is the difference between her and the T-800 from the first movie? Not that much, aside from one is flesh and bone and the other is flesh and cybernetic parts. But the point still stands. And John and the T-800 stop her before she can fulfill her mission, and they kind of talk her down, and they explain to Miles Dyson the danger of what's going to happen. And probably my favorite effect in this whole movie is when Arnold takes a knife, cuts his arm, and just rips off his hand like a glove, revealing the cybernetic hand. It's such a cool effect. It's a simple effect. It's clearly just an animatronic hand, but the way it's shot, the way it's paced, the reveal of it is so good and so well executed. I love it. But the movie really comes ahead when they go to shut down Cyberdyne. There's a lot of exciting action. Arnold's got a minigun on one arm and a grenade launcher slung across his shoulder. He takes care of business. But unfortunately, Miles Dyson does die in this scene, and he sacrifices himself to blow up all of Cyberdyne's systems, which is an act of valor if ever I saw one. But the T-1000 is still after them because this thing is relentless. He's not stopping. Every time they try to cut him off or get him out of the picture, he just keeps coming back. And now we have our big third act climax in this steel mill, I'm pretty sure is what it is. And in kind of a reversal of the original movie where you have the fake out death being a bunch of fire burning off the flesh, here's the opposite. You actually have liquid nitrogen freezing the T-1000, and Arnold shoots them and it just shatters into a million pieces. And you think that's the end, but no. Piece by piece, the liquid metal starts to melt and reform and reconstitute itself back into the T-1000. And it's here where you have the final showdown, and this is where some of the best practical and CGI effects come together, because you see this thing get blown apart, all different body horror-esque shapes, stuff that kind of reminds me of The Thing in its final form. It just has this very weird, twisted look to it that is so memorable, so iconic. And then it gets pushed into this vat of liquid steel and it melts and screams, and it's this horrifying image of CGI faces inside of faces. It's really creepy. And that's the end of the T-1000. But that's not the end of the movie, because we also have to say goodbye to Arnold, because after the bond that he made with both Sarah and John, especially John, who's still at a pretty impressionable age and needing that father figure, he has to say goodbye. He has to melt himself down, because if he stays alive, somebody is going to get his CPU and get his technology, and everything that they work to get rid of Skynet will just happen all over again. So they say goodbye. It's very touching. He gets lowered into the ground. He gives the signature thumb up before he melts. And yeah, that's pretty much the end of the movie. But there is something I want to touch on, because there are two versions of this movie out there. There's the theatrical cut that was played in theaters and is probably the most widely known version of this movie, and then there's the extended edition, the director's cut, that has a bunch of deleted scenes included. And on my DVD, it has that extended edition, and I, for one, really do appreciate this extended edition. I feel like there's a lot of great additions that they have in here. For instance, there's a scene where they're repairing the back of Arnold Schwarzenegger's head. They have to take out his CPU chip, and Sarah really has a conviction to destroy it. Just destroy it, wipe it out, and just fend for ourselves for the rest of the time, because this machine is not to be trusted. And based on our experience with the first movie, I don't blame her. It's a really powerful scene, really interesting effects that they got going on in that scene. So I'm glad that they put that in there. And likewise with the climax, when the T-1000 reconstitutes himself and he starts chasing them, there are a few moments where his hand will touch a railing and it'll absorb the texture of the railing, and his foot will kind of squish and malfunction a little bit. It shows that this T-1000 prototype is still a prototype. It's not fully realized. There are things that, especially when it was destroyed at that level, it was still able to reform, but it's not as perfect as it used to be. And I like that little detail, because it shows that as the fighting has going on, it's really been taking a toll on this machine that we've seen throughout the whole movie not miss a beat. It's been pretty flawless, and here in its last moments, you do start to notice some cracks form, and I liked that. And one inclusion that I do appreciate, but I do understand why they cut it, are the visions that Sarah's having in the institution. The one specifically having to do with Kyle Reese, because it was really nice seeing Michael Biehn come back as Kyle Reese. I like seeing it, and I like the dialogue that they're having in these scenes where he's saying some of the stuff from the first movie, reminding us of the call to responsibility that she got there, and not taking that for granted. And on top of that, there are touching moments, because in that first movie, you definitely understood the romance that was building, but here, you feel like this is a progression of that romance. You never really got to have closure on that romance because Kyle died so abruptly. And here, you definitely feel the love that these two people had for each other in that short time that they had each other. But at the same time, I do see why they were cut. They do drag down the pacing a little bit. I like seeing them because I'm just a big Terminator nerd, and anytime we see Kyle Reese, I'm a fan. I just love his character. But the one addition in this movie that I flat out just don't like is the ending. Because in the theatrical cut, it's just a single shot of black pavement on the highway that they're driving over, and it's Sarah Connor's voice talking about how the future is not set, and now they're in uncharted territory because they've effectively ended Judgment Day. They blew up Cyberdyne, so who knows where the future takes us. It's a very mysterious, open-ended kind of question that maybe the future will still go the way of the Terminator. Maybe it won't. We just don't know. But when they were filming it, they had another ending that was a bit more concrete, a bit more of a nice wrap-up to this story that was brought back in the extended edition, and it's where you see old Sarah Connor in some pretty lame old age makeup. Old age makeup is notoriously hard to make look convincing, but this just felt underwhelming. It didn't feel all that good. But she's an older woman. She's looking at John Connor, now as a grown man, played by the same actor that we saw for 2 seconds in the opening with the apocalyptic future with the scars on his face. Here, there's no scars. He's got a kid he's pushing on the swing. She's just looking on, very happy, content with her life. And for me, this does not nearly have the same amount of drama or mystery that the theatrical ending had. And based on where this franchise is on, it wouldn't make any sense at all to have this happy ending, because we know that more Terminators will come and the future is just kind of caught in this whole time loop thing. And admittedly, I'm not a fan of these other movies. I would like it if it was just 1 and 2 and that was it. They just stopped there. And having this more definitive wrap up for my brain does make it feel like it's just these 2 movies that are canon. But I don't know, I do like the mystery element of the original ending. So you can kind of pick your poison on the ending, but for me, I feel like just the simplicity of that mysterious ending rings more true. I like the voiceover. I like what Sarah had to say about the future and the uncertainty of it. And I just felt like it was a really succinct wrap up to a fantastic movie. And that's pretty much my thoughts on Terminator 2 Judgment Day. It's a phenomenal action movie. The action is top notch. It's James Cameron doing exactly what a sequel should do. It took the ideas that were introduced in the first movie and expanded on them both in story and in special effects, in spectacle, in scale. This is a much bigger movie, more ambitious than the first movie, and he has the directing chops, and all the actors do a great job at bringing this vision to life. It's a classic for a reason. It's probably one of those movies that does supersede the original as far as quality. It's in the conversation. For me, I always enjoy the first Terminator for what it is, but if I were to look at it critically, this one is technically better. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Terminator 2 Judgment Day? Do you like it better than the original? Is it your favorite Terminator movie? Is there a Terminator movie that's come out later that you think is better than this? Probably not, but I still ask the question. Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. As always, I'm Colby. This is My Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.